Welcome to the Oral History Podcast, featuring stories from the oral history website voicesofoklahoma.com, where Oklahomans have given generously of their time to tell their life stories for present-day listeners and for generations to come. Our entire collection is available on the website voicesofoklahoma.com. Subscribe to be notified of new Oklahoma oral history podcasts. Here's another interesting storyteller from voicesofoklahoma.com. Equipped with a degree from the University of Tulsa and the experience of working with his father, Dan P. Holmes, in his insurance business, Burt B. Holmes and Chester Cadieux co-founded QuikTrip Corporation in 1958. QuikTrip has grown to be one of the country's most successful convenience store networks. Later, he established Burt B. Holmes and Associates, the predecessor of the Holmes Organization Incorporated. In 2010, the University of Tulsa's Collins College of Business named Holmes the Outstanding Entrepreneur for his dedication to lifelong learning, entrepreneurship, and support for the arts, education, and community. Burt is president and director of Leaders Life Insurance Company, the American Institute of Medical Technology, and National Occupational Health Services. In this interview, you will hear Burt talk about his chance meeting with Chester Cadieux, which Burt says was the best thing that ever happened to both men. If he hadn't met Chester on the streets of Tulsa that day, he would have sold the idea of a convenience store to someone else. And Burt talks candidly about the relationship he had with his father in this oral history interview heard on voicesofoklahoma.com.
My name is John Erling. Today's date is May 28, 2014. Burt, state your full name, your date of birth, and your present age, please.
Burt B. Holmes, October 8, 1931, 82.
B.
Bonfoy, B-O-N-F-O-E-Y.
What's the significance of that name?
Well, he was a good friend of my dad's when my dad started in the insurance business back in the 30s. And when I came along, he named me after two insurance men. One was a guy he worked for named Burt Halliburton, and the other was Mr. Bonfoy, who I never knew.
Tell us, where are we recording this interview?
In the offices of the Holmes Organization, a large general insurance agency in Tulsa. We're domiciled in what used to be the old Warren Petroleum Building. It's now known as International Towers or something like that, yeah.
Where were you born?
St. John's Hospital.
Talk about your mother's name, maiden name, and where she was from.
Her name was Alice Margaret Lambertson. She was from Moline, Illinois. She and her mom moved down here back in the 20s. Yeah. Met my dad, who moved here in 1907, I think. I'm not entirely certain, but I think, yeah.
What was your mother's personality like? What was she like?
I never think of it in those terms. She was a very nice woman to be around. I enjoyed being her son, I'll tell you that.
Your father's name?
Dan P. Holmes.
What does the P stand for?
Perkins.
Do you know the significance of that?
Nope.
He moved here in
Probably right after World War I. They moved here from Fayetteville, Arkansas. He was born in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. They moved to Arkansas and then to Tulsa. His dad owned a small grocery store at 5th and Lewis.
What was the name of that?
It's the Holmes Grocery.
Okay.
And there were a lot of small grocery stores in neighborhoods at that time. They no longer exist.
What was his personality like?
Well, he's very intense and very highly motivated guy. He graduated from Central High School. His dad offered to give him a car or send him to the University of Tulsa, and he took the car. We've always laughed about that.
How did he get in the insurance business?
He gets out of high school, took the car, started looking for a job, held some jobs with oil companies and this and that, never did worth a damn at him, hated the work, and somehow someone referred him to Burt Halliburton, who was apparently looking for a young guy. He gave my dad $100 a month and a car drive. That was in about 1931 or 2. And about 3 or 4 years later, Burt Halliburton jumped out of the window at the Hotel Tulsa and killed himself. So my dad was there, looked after his business for the widow, and after probably 4 or 5 years, bought the insurance agency from her.
The Halliburton name, now we hear that.
They're not the Halliburtons of Duncan.
Okay.
They wish they were. No, those are oil and gas related people
right.
down there. This is no relation.
Right. He had Dan P. Holmes.
And Associates, that's correct.
You're right.
And I worked for him for 10 and a half years.
We remembered his commercials that he did on television.
It's probably the best piece of institutional advertising that's ever happened in Tulsa, in my opinion. And it just happened. It was not planned.
Tell us what happened. Tell us what it was.
Well, Fred Jones was a client of his, and they had that radio station. They wanted him to advertise. So he said, okay, I will. He would open every one of the newscasts that he was sponsoring with a few words. Highway 33 wasn't much of a road, and probably couldn't be much of a road because there was no highway money in the state at that time. But somehow, before World War II, the University of Tulsa played the University of Arkansas every Thanksgiving afternoon for many years in Skelly Stadium. After World War II, Arkansas says, we ain't doing that no more. If you want to play us, you can play us over in Fayetteville, and we'd be happy to play you. So everyone in Tulsa that was interested in those things started dragging over there once a year over that terrible road. He hated that road. You really hate it when you go over there and you get your ass whipped and you come home on that terrible road, you know. So anyhow, he said, we need to do something to spruce up that road over there. But he also recognized something that happened after World War II, is the economic change in northwestern Arkansas. In 1939, a guy named Peterson put in the first pen of chickens in Decatur, Arkansas. That's in 39, before the World War. Some other people over in the Springdale, Fayetteville, Arkansas started the chicken business at that same time. And he recognized that there was industry going in over there. And that part of Arkansas, when they went someplace, they got on the train, which was only north-south, and it went to Kansas City. That was where they went to do things. Tulsa was a lot closer than Kansas City. And he says, if we can just figure out a way to get them over here, it'll be good for them and good for us. We need to figure out a way so we can do business with them and vice versa. So he started pushing this Highway 33 thing, talking to people about it. And one night, it just came to him. He was in front of that damn mic, didn't know how to finish. He said, and remember Highway 33. Somehow that caught on. He kept doing it, and he became known as Mr. Highway 33. It was a spectacular piece of institutional advertising, and just by happenstance.
And everybody talked about it.
Still do.
And still do, right. But then that became Highway 412.
But before it was changed, Highway 33 was taken to 169, which is Shoto, okay? Henry Bowman dedicated the highway to there. He said, Dan, he says, you know, it'll take us another 10 or 15 years to get enough road money to get this darn thing from here to Siloam Springs, and it's only 40 miles. He said, I tell you what I do, I'll just build a turnpike. And 3 years later, there was a turnpike there, and it just changed the complexion of business in our part of the country. Do you realize that for many years, 25% of the cars in Utica Square Shopping Center on weekends were from Arkansas? That just jumped out at you, what it's done, you know.
They say even Mrs. Walton drove over from Arkansas, Sam's wife, to shop in Utica Square.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And now Highway 412 is a beautiful drive. I drove it on Memorial Day weekend to avoid the other traffic, and it all started with Mr. Highway 33.
You know, he had a lot to do with it. There is no doubt about that. Now, when we were standing there talking to Henry, there were a couple of Amish guys. You know, it went through Inola. Yeah. And I said, hey, what do you think about this new highway? He said, oh, we love it. Well, what do you mean? He said, well, now we can race our buggies and we won't have to contend with any cars.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I had two brothers, younger, one 2 years younger, Dan P. Holmes, Jr. He's now deceased. Then I have one named Vic Holmes, who's still alive, and he's 12 years younger than I.
Did you have any recollection of grandparents?
Yeah.
Tell us about them.
In the Depression, about the time my dad went in the insurance business, there were no jobs here. And my step-grandfather couldn't get work. He had worked for the county or somebody and got laid off, couldn't get any work here. So my dad went over to Arkansas, Decatur, and bought them a log cabin in 10 acres that had some vineyards on it, and gave him a pickup truck in Decatur. So that's where we went every summer, and that was my mom's mom. He was the only guy in town, that town of 350, that had a pickup truck. Everyone else was driving horses and buggies and so on. When they wanted to sell a pig or something up in Joplin, my grandpa would put it in the thing and take care of it for him. Yeah.
What was his name?
His name was Harv McConnell.
So you have fond memories then
Yes,
of
I
him.
do.
What was the first house you remember living in?
It was catty corner across the street from the southwest corner of Barnard School. And you asked this good question. I've just gone through that this week, finding every house that I lived in. I was born in St. John's, but went home just across the street from Barnard School on 17th Place.
You said you've gone through every house you lived in. You moved many times?
You want the list? I just got the list today. We moved from there a year or two later down to 19th Street, just off of Yorktown, just a couple of blocks south of there. Then around 1940, my dad decided to build a house out on 31st Street, 2500 block East 31st Street. He bought 2 lots out there, paid $600 a piece for them, built a house, and we moved out there when I was in the 2nd grade. Lived there clear into college, and then after I got married in college, we had an apartment out by TU, then a rental house out by TU, and then bought our first house on 26th Place off of Pittsburgh. Back then, the average stay for people in a house was 7 years. And it pissed me off because I never considered myself average, but I stayed in that house 7 years. We moved out on 53rd Street, and I stayed 7 years. And then I built a big house out behind Southern Hills. I stayed about 9 there. But this 7-year deal was just interesting.
Yeah. But when your dad bought those lots at 31st, that was like moving out in the country?
Let me just tell you. Do you know where George Kaiser lives right now?
Yeah.
That's where I'm talking about. We lived 2 houses east of there. 2 more houses east of there, the pavement ended, and there was a dirt road to Harvard, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Across the street was a woods. We used to hide out there and watch the bootleggers sell and change stuff between cars.
The first school you attended?
Was Barnard. I went there through the beginning of the 2nd grade. I had a series of childhood illnesses starting in September. It lasted 6-8 weeks. The doctor advised my mom to keep me out of school that year. So I've been retarded ever since. At least 1 year retarded, ever since then. Then, instead of going back to Barnard, which my folks thought the class sizes were too big, we went to Elliott.
What was that childhood disease?
Measles, just all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Nothing serious. I did have a little bit of pneumonia at that time, but I got over it. Yeah.
Polio was big. You didn't have polio?
Yeah, I've had polio. I have post-polio syndrome as we sit here, but that was not until I started in junior high school when polio hit, and I went to Wilson Junior High School.
Okay, so then we can jump to that time in your life, Wilson. Mm-hmm. Polio was a big thing then. Mm-hmm. The Salk vaccine had not been invented yet. Vaccine. Mm-hmm. So tell us about it and how you think you got it.
Well, fortunately, I don't know how I got it, and no one knows how it was passed on. They would say it was in the swimming pools, we were overexerted. There are a variety of ideas, but I got it right after a friend of mine hired me to work at her farm and do some stuff, and I worked my tail off, and it was really hot. The next week, I did come down with it. Now, fortunately, it was a mild case. It only essentially affected my lower right leg, but I limped when I got well. I wasn't truly well. It never kept me from playing athletics because I played in spite of the fact that I limped, and I got well eventually.
How long were you laid up with the polio?
I was not laid up in a hospital or anything. I had friends that were. I had friends that died.
They called it infantile paralysis.
Yes, they did. Mm-hmm.
And many were paralyzed, and so you were considered to be very fortunate.
I was very fortunate. Do you know Mr. Barnett?
No.
Who are the people who own the Tribune, or used to own the Tribune?
The Joneses.
The Jones. Her name was Mr. Jones.
Okay.
She married Howard Barnett, who started the Brookside Bank, okay?
Yep.
She had polio.
Oh.
Really bad. Yeah, she really had it bad, and I didn't. She fought that thing and would not give up. She got where she could walk again and do an awful lot of things.
And we all know that our president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, had polio.
Yeah.
You kind of related to him then, I suppose, when you knew you had that. Along in here is 1941 and December 7th.
I know exactly where it was.
And Pearl Harbor. Tell us where you were.
Sunday afternoon. On Sundays, we used to take rides. You know, there's no air conditioning home and no air conditioning cars. You'd go out for a ride. In December, it wasn't hot, but anyhow, we were about a mile west on Apache from the airport. The radio was on. It came over the radio.
And you were 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Remember the adults talking about it?
Oh, yeah, the adults talked about it. I didn't understand what they're saying. All they would say, the Japs have bombed Pearl Harbor. I didn't know where Pearl Harbor was.
Right. So the days after that, and certainly much after that, there was rationing and that type of thing. Do you recall any of that?
Oh, sure. We all had ration cards. They had ration cards not just for food, but they had ration cards for gasoline, tires, a variety of things. We didn't suffer from rationing. Rationing apparently was needed, but we certainly were not inconvenienced, other than a little inconvenience by rationing.
Family members, did they join the military as a result of the bombing, or do you recall anybody?
I had no family members that were in World War II that I know about. My dad was on a draft board in World War II. I think he was 38 or something like that. He was on a draft board, but that's the closest he ever got to the action.
Mm-hmm. And then you're on to high school.
Yeah, I went on from Wilson to Will Rogers.
What year would you graduated from Will Rogers?
1950.
Do you have friends that you remember then, maybe even friends today that attended Will Rogers?
Some, sure.
Any names that we might know?
Steve Avery, have you ever heard that name?
Yes.
He's the one that's pushing the deal that his granddad, you know, the big statue down by the river. Steve was in my class there. He's moved back to Tulsa here, by the way. He's very active in trying to get the Highway 66 museum built there and so on at that statue, which is a magnificent piece, by the way, down there.
Avery Drive.
Yeah.
Was his grandfather then that kind of helped direct Highway 66 to come through Tulsa?
It was his grandfather, yes. Mm-hmm.
If it hadn't been for him, Highway
it
66
might not have gotten
may
here,
never
yeah.
have made it here.
It may not have made
Right.
it.
Tell us about Tulsa in the 50s, downtown, the places you shop for clothes or restaurants, that type of thing,
Right,
where you
fine.
hung out.
I didn't hang out downtown, but downtown is where you did business. There were no shopping centers at that time. Clark's Good Clothes, Renberg's downtown, Brown Duncan's, Vandiver's. Those were the main stores that we did business with downtown. Bishop's Restaurant was downtown. The YMCA, which used to be over by the bus terminal. Do you know where Old City Hall used to be over here on Cincinnati?
I do.
The bus terminal was catty corner to that. And the YMCA was right across the street north where the Bank of Oklahoma parking garage is.
Yep.
That's where the YMCA was. I used to come down on Saturdays and play basketball at the Y. We'd bring a quarter. We'd go down and play basketball at the Y, and then we'd go down the old Tulsa World building on Boulder. The original Coney Island was there. The old man had those thick glasses. That's where we used to go. He would be in the window, what I call fingering the weenies. They had a hot spot on the grill. He'd put the cold ones over here and keep moving them over here, and I call that fingering the wieners, okay? Anyhow, I was standing there one day, and you'll get a big kick out of this. It was hot, and there was no air conditioning back then. He had a bottle of beer up here on a shelf right beside that thing. I was watching him, and he was fingering the wieners, and he reached up here and got that beer, took a big swig of it, put it back up there, and then took his fingers and went and continued fingering the wieners. And downstairs, next door to that, was a pool hall, and we all liked to think we were sneaking into and being big, you know.
Were you driving a car at that time?
No, I didn't drive a car. You could drive one when you were 16 then, but I flunked the test, so I didn't get to drive one for another year.
So the time you're talking about is
We
when
rode
you were
the bus down.
14, 15 years old, or 13 and somewhere
No, I
in
was
there.
younger than that. This was in junior high school.
Okay.
Yeah, I was younger than that.
Remember the treatment of blacks, the signs, say no blacks, or restaurants, or
Oh,
any?
yeah.
Did you
Oh, shit, yeah.
tell us what you observed?
Well, we always had a maid, and the maids came to work then on the bus and went home on the bus. We had one for many years, a wonderful human being. She had a couple of sons who were really nice men. Boys at that time became very nice men. I'll never forget, one time her son was picking me up at Elliott School. He was parallel parking and barely tapped a car in front of him. The guy driving the car in front of him jumped out, comes back, starts yelling at him, calling him a nigger, and just treated him just awful. He started crying. I mean, it was an awful, awful thing. That put an indelible mark on me, and I've always been involved in things around town involving them right now. In fact, I just gave 5 scholarships to TU only for black students.
I want to get into that later here. But anyway, you saw the way they were treated, and they couldn't go into some of those stores that you talked about earlier.
You know, I did not notice that they were not going in those stores, but come to think of it, I don't think I ever saw any in them.
Yeah. Theaters, movie stars at the time?
We had the Rialto and the Orpheum and the Ritz. Those are the 3 downtown theaters of consequence. And then there's some cheaper ones north of 3rd Street by the viaducts where little off-color things were showed from time to time.
Any particular movies or stars that you were enamored with maybe at the time?
I've never been enamored with movie stars. Only radio guys. I get enamored with radio guys, yeah.
In the 50s, do you remember the fear of communism and the talk about that?
Hey, look, what happened in World War II? We were so propagandized. One of our greatest allies was Stalin. We loved him, yeah. Chiang Kai-shek wasn't a very nice guy. He just happened to be our guy instead of a so-called communist. But the propaganda was just awful during the war. And Japs were very bad, almost inhuman beings.
According to our
propaganda.
Yeah,
it was terrible. It was terrible, terrible stuff. Now, I didn't understand at that time how terrible it was because I had no frame of reference, being so young. The communist deal got fanned after the war was over when Russia would not, in effect, retreat and, in fact, take over all of Eastern Europe. We let them take over too much, but Truman felt apparently that they had lost so many people that they had some entitlements, which included enslaving some other people, which did tend to piss me off just a little bit.
Then there was always that fear that communism was going to come here to the United States
Yes, it was.
and take over.
But no one could tell you why or how.
Right. But we fought communism in other areas as well. It was always we had to make a move because if we don't, communism is going to take over certain countries.
Yeah, but think what happened in Hollywood. I mean, they just beat up a bunch of people intellectually and business-wise who were good people.
When they blacklisted them.
They blacklisted them, yeah. That was absolutely wrong.
Do you remember listening to presidents on the radio?
Oh, sure.
Franklin Roosevelt, his fireside chats.
He used to have a saying, well, we've changed it into something. I love the United States. Eleanor loves the United States. Fala, his little dog, loves the United States. He had these fireside chats, and they were pretty damn effective. Yeah.
Remember as a family listening to the radio?
Yeah.
Have you ever come in contact with presidents in your entire life?
Only once.
Who's that?
When we dedicated the lock out at the port.
The port of Catoosa.
Nixon came in for the dedication.
Yeah.
I was sitting in the front row, and he came down that row and shook hands with people, and I did shake his hand and said, "We're happy you're here, Mr. President." I was less happy about him later on, but at that time I was happy with him.
Why were you there?
I was involved in some local somethings. I forget what it was that got me the opportunity to sit out there and do that. Yeah, I've been involved in a lot of stuff, one way or another.
Former Governor David Hall was there, too.
Yeah, I think so. I knew him. He's a client of ours, and he needed to go to jail.
So Richard Nixon that day, he must have impressed you in person. He was a handsome, good-looking man, and then he gave a good speech.
Yeah. Now, I did something to that deal, which I've never talked to anyone very much about, a few people. There was a photographer there that day who was a felon, and I knew he was a felon. He was a disbarred attorney. What he had done, he was dating a woman who I knew, and she started dating somebody else who happened to be a doctor here in town. This guy hired somebody to throw acid in that doctor's face. Pretty big scandal deal. So this guy couldn't be an attorney again. He was working for a television station as a cameraman. I was concerned about that, him being a felon and had created some violence, so I told someone about him out there. They didn't do anything about it. I'm pretty sure they had someone watching, but they did not pull him away and make him not work.
You go on to college to Tulsa University. That was a no-brainer, I guess.
Well, yes and no. My dad was on the board at that time. He didn't go there, but he got on the board ultimately. We did love the school. I decided to go, though, because they offered me a half scholarship to play basketball. That's the reason I went. It's a terrible reason to go to school, but that's what I did do. We didn't have to go financially. I played basketball 1 year, and then the next fall, basketball season started on October 1, but you could not go in and practice till October 15. Bob Patterson, you know who Bob Patterson is? Bob was a freshman that fall. He and I were outside running. We ran from the north end of the stadium to the south end of the stadium. At that time, there were temporary bleachers on the field, and the two best players on the team were hiding under those bleachers. They had been out drunk all night the night before and didn't want to run any. Bob and I ran by them and looked at them, and I got around the corner. I said, "Holmes, it doesn't make any difference how many laps you run, how many steps you run. They're going to play, and you aren't because they have talent and you don't." I went in the next day and told the coach I just didn't think I wanted to do this anymore. You know what? He didn't even try to dissuade me from leaving. I wonder if he understood the same thing. There was a guy named Clarence Iba at that time. Yeah.
Clarence Iba.
That was Henry's brother. Yeah.
And he was coach at TU.
Yes, he was.
I didn't know that. So had Clarence Iba been there for some time? Was he
been there about 2 or 3 years? A couple of years later, he quit coaching and moved to Fort Worth. But he was there, certainly was. Joe Swank was his assistant coach, and Joe became a head coach at TU after him.
Tell our listeners who Bob Patterson was.
Bob Patterson was from Kansas City, Missouri. He was a wonderful high school basketball player. During the spring, he would ride the train down and practice with us. He came to TU to play basketball and ultimately married Walt Helmrich's sister. He is still alive. She is not alive anymore, but he still lives here in Tulsa. And is a very good man.
You then earned a degree
in business administration, yeah.
So you graduated in what year?
1954.
You became a strong supporter of TU, and you are to this day, are you not?
I have always liked the University of Tulsa. I graduated, I was 22 years old. When I was 26, I was president of the Alumni Association. I like to be around bright people, and I've just always been around the university, one way or another, yeah.
And today you are an emeritus board member.
That's
of
correct.
Board of Trustees.
That's correct.
How long were you a board member there?
About 19 years.
So you
And I was chairman of the board a couple of years.
seen it grow to what it is today.
I've seen the evolution, and it's been spectacular. Slow for a while, and then it accelerated. I had torn down the first houses that were torn down west of the campus, 26 of them. Charlie Norman, the next year, was the first one to get apartments built on the campus, and we put the campus plan in place, which has been modified somewhat, but that's when it all got started, about then.
And now President Stedman Upham has done a great job in
He's
leading.
done a great job. But the thing that really helped that thing was Fulton Collins. Very key figure. He was chairman. He ran that thing as chairman of the board for about 9 years. He probably left $20 million of his own money in that school before he passed away. He worked out there, wasn't always liked by the presidents because he was insistent on making them say things the way it was, would not let them dance around issues and so on. But the execution of the campus plan, he caused to happen. And he was a wonderful human being and so incredibly bright, it's unbelievable.
And now their major administration building is named in honor of him.
Yes, it is. And when they were raising money for that, they went to QuikTrip, and QuikTrip gave them some money and named the boardroom after me. And I got lucky, and they also put a portrait of mine in the boardroom.
They did. And I don't know if it looks better than you really look or not, but it's pretty nice.
I think it's better. And I'll tell you who did it, though, and why. Chester Cadieux's daughter did that. She is a big-time painter in California. Since they gave me the money, I suggested they use her to do the portrait, and it worked out well.
Yeah, it did. I read where you were described as mild-mannered and unassuming. Is that really an accurate description of you? Mild-mannered and unassuming? In other words, that's a laugh.
Well, I tend to say what I believe or think, and some people that's an asset, and some people it's a liability. It's just the way it is.
So to follow your life, somewhere in here you were married, right?
I got married in 1952, the year after I quit playing basketball.
And her name was?
Carlin Lea, L-E-A.
Okay.
She and I had gone to high school together over at Will Rogers.
Out of college then, what is your first business? What do you do?
I went to work for my dad, and that's one reason that I wasn't a very good student. I knew I had a job. Most of my buddies didn't know they were going to have a job or what it was going to be, so many of them made good grades. I didn't, because I knew I was going to work for my dad, which in retrospect I'm not liking very well. I wasted a lot of time and intellect where I could have been developing intellect, because you realize that in a 4-year college life for most people, it's the only time in their life that they have nothing to think about except education. I did not take advantage of those years.
You still graduated in 4 years.
Yeah.
And you did get a degree.
Yeah.
You're wondering how much knowledge you took with you, though. Is that what you're wondering?
But I left a lot I could have taken with me. Yes, I did.
By the way, why the spelling of using an S instead of a Z in the Dan P. Holmes organization?
You know, I told you that I hated to be thought of as average.
Yeah.
You're average. Every person that sees it asks me the same question. And I did it because I was going to change the name of my company from Burt B. Holmes and Associates to something. About that time on television, I saw a television ad for the Rank organization, R-A-N-K organization, S-A-T-I-O-N, in London. They had IBM over there and then some entertainment stuff at the same time. I thought, if I use organization, spell it that way, people will ask. And everyone asks. We've sent that to printers. They've changed it, sent it back. We made them go reprint material. And it served the purpose. And I learned about that in marketing at TU, about trying to set yourself apart from other people. I did that with that, and it's been very effective.
But that was Dan P. Holmes. That was your father's name.
No, his name was Dan P. Holmes and Associates.
Oh, I see.
And I left him, and then I named it Burt B. Holmes and Associates when I left for about 8 or 9 years. Then I changed it to the Holmes Organization, yeah.
Okay.
My dad and I did not compete against each other, but I think at that time I was trying to differentiate myself from him somewhat.
Why did you have to leave? Why did you leave?
Because he didn't want me to own any part of the business. He just wanted me to work there, and that didn't work for me very well.
So there came a day you realized
10.5 years after I went to work for him, I left.
he told you you're not going to own any of this.
Yes, he did. Mm-hmm.
So you went out on your own.
Yes, I did. Called a fraternity brother of mine who's an accountant. I'm not good at that. I said, hey, look, I'm leaving my dad on January 1. I need someone to run the insides, the insurance agency, the administration. You're an accountant. You know how to do all that stuff. I'll give you 10% of the deal if you will do that. I will do all the selling, bring in the business, and that's what we did do.
When your father passed on, his organization went where? What happened to that?
My brother worked for him, and my brother worked for him while I was with him, too. He was 2 years younger than I. He stayed with him. I tried to get my brother, when I left, to come with me. He would not. And after my dad died, I said, look, Dan, why don't you come on over here and join us? He said, no. He said, I've never had a chance to do anything up here in management. I want a chance to run this business. He did do that, and it did not go well. Probably 4 or 5 years later, he called me one day and said, hey, I think I need to come on over there with you guys. So we moved what business he had left. He'd lost most of my dad's business. What he had left with us, we took care of it. And fortunately for him, a year after he got to us, he had open heart surgery. And he would have no one up there able to run his business when that happened. And so I was happy that we were together for that reason.
Well, I don't need to meddle anymore, but obviously...
Hey, you can ask me any question. We are what I call pushing and shoving. I don't have any egos involved in any of these issues.
So there was an estrangement then between you and your father.
About 18 years.
So there was no sitting around the Thanksgiving table or maybe celebrating Christmases together.
Maybe occasionally. Occasionally we went on and still did that, yeah, but it was not pleasant. Mm-hmm. And I was upset with my mom because she ratified his acts. But now I know that women in that era, that was much the way that they were brought up. And I did not know that at the time, did not understand it. So I was estranged with her for quite some time. And towards the latter part of her life, she and I got back a lot closer. We weren't close, but a lot closer. And I was happy it turned out that way.
But with your father to his dying day, this was still an issue between the two of you.
Yeah.
Do you look back on that with regrets?
No, I did the right thing for me.
You're probably saying he should have looked back on it with regret.
I don't know. I don't think of those issues very much.
Right.
However, that word regret, I did learn a little later on when I got a divorce and how to use that word. But no, I did the right thing for me.
When did you meet Chester Cadieux?
Well, as far as QuikTrip's concerned, in 1957. However, I had gone to junior high school with Chester at Wilson Junior High School. He went down to Central, I went to Rogers. We didn't see each other until after we both had graduated from college. We met at a wedding. I got to know him then. He was in the Air Force at the time, and he came back and went to work. Trying to sell printing, wasn't very good at it. I was standing in front of the Phil Tower building one May afternoon. I saw Chester coming down the street, and of course he was only about 5'6", and I looked down at him and said, "You look awful, Chester." He said, "Well, Holmes, you don't look much better yourself." I said, "Well, let me tell you my problem." So I took him inside. There was a place called the Tower Grill at that time. It had great malts. I bought him a malt and told him that I had this idea. I'd been down to Dallas and seen 7-Eleven stores, and I thought there needed to be some up here. And I tried to do a deal with a guy for a year, a guy named Harry Burt, whose dad used to own Burt's Good Humor Ice Cream Company here in town. I never could get it done with him.
Okay, you asked the ice cream man. You wanted him to get in the convenience business with you.
I wanted him to be what ended up being the Chester. And he did not want to do that or couldn't. So I went on and signed a letter agreement for a lease. And then I ran into Chester and I told him, I said, "Chester, this is what I'm doing." I said, "A friend of mine at the bank across the street is going to loan me $5,000. I've got 3 guys who want to put up $2,000 apiece. And I'm looking for someone who put up $5,000 and I'll let him run the company." Chester said, "I hate what I'm doing. I might like to do that." I said, "Well, look, I'm leaving town for a week. When I come back, I'll check with you." He said, "Well, I'll talk to my dad and see what he said." He came back, his dad told him he'd loan him $5,000, and that's how it got started. It was about that simple.
So then you had a total of about how many thousands of dollars?
16.
$16,000.
Yeah. And next year we put in another $4,000.
Okay.
And then never any more money.
What was the name again of the man you first asked to go in on this business with you?
Harry Burt, B-U-R-T, Jr.
Did he live to know how QuikTrip took off?
Oh, yeah.
Did he ever say to you, "I should have done this, Burt"?
No, not really.
You also did some misspelling in the name of QuikTrip.
No, that was by design. I thought up the name, but I got some help from a guy in your business a little bit with that.
In the advertising business?
Mm-hmm. I had this name, and I was sitting down one day telling Hugh Finnerty what I was wanting to do. You remember Hugh?
Hugh Finnerty was a big name in this town, in baseball and all.
And I knew him through athletics and so on. And he said, Burt, that's a great name, but we shouldn't treat it the way you're treating it. I said, what do you mean? I had a QUICK-TRIP. He said, we need to get this snappier. And he said, well, let's do it QUIK-TRIP. He said, that is a better way of doing it. He's absolutely right. Yeah.
So then you dropped the hyphen.
Mm-hmm. And eventually started using the QT a lot, but that didn't happen for a number of years.
Chester was to do the legwork.
He was to run the company. He was to run the stores. I was going to get the money and the locations. And after about 3 or 4 or 5 years, he did not need me to do either one of those things. And he became, frankly, a world-class businessman.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that the ability to do that was there.
There were ups and downs, and I have interviewed Chester here on voicesofoklahoma.com, and he talks about what you're talking about. You will also remember he talks about the first store that you opened up. That had to be a big thing in your mind, and it was actually in a construction area. And Chester talks about he put out a sign that said, help, out in front of the business. So what were your feelings about this, wondering, is this going to work or not?
Well, my dad was about to die. My dad's dad had gone bankrupt in the grocery business in the 30s over on 5th Street. My dad was just very upset that I was going into a grocery business. What happened is I had signed a letter agreement for 2,400 square feet in a strip shopping center at 52nd and Peoria on the west side of the street. After we did that and got started, the city decided to redo the intersection there because the guy that owned the Chinese restaurant north of the bypass right now was going to build a shopping center across the street from us, and they needed utilities. And they needed all the underground and that stuff. So they shut down the damn street in front of us for 8 weeks. We were dying. We didn't have any business. The kids in the neighborhood ride their bikes in, or the parents would walk in. But that's not enough to put in your ear, But we made it through. And the rest is history.
You must have had nights where you worried about it?
No, I don't worry.
That's not part of your nature?
That's not part of me.
Do not worry.
I do not worry. I slept just as well then as I've ever slept in my life.
Chester talks about the experimentation of what to sell. He talked about selling wigs at one time and canoes, and he says, we didn't know what.
We didn't know anything.
Didn't know anything.
Didn't know anything. But he got lucky early on. Get and Go started 2 weeks before we did. They brought up a guy from Texas named Billy Neal. Billy ran a convenience store down in Texas someplace. Chester got to know him somehow, and Billy got upset with Get and Go, who was owned by Hale Halsell, the wholesaler. Chester said, well, why don't you come over and help us for a while? He did come over and help Chester with a lot, and we were very fortunate that that did happen.
At the time, the very idea of convenience had to be sold to the public. They didn't grasp what you guys were trying to do.
That's correct, but convenience was not used in connection with the stores. People called them bantams, small, bantam rooster, I forget what else they called them. Convenience store. That word came along some years later.
Okay, what the idea then was
The idea was convenience. People said, what do you mean QuikTrip? I said, that's exactly what it is. You come in front, get in, and get out real quick. That's a QuikTrip. Yeah.
And people had to slowly figure that out.
Yeah. But my name connoted that, and a whole bunch of them don't.
Weren't you also a little more expensive than maybe the grocery stores?
Sure.
Because you were making it easy for them to come in and grab it.
Well, that plus the fact that we couldn't buy as cheap as the grocery stores could.
Oh.
Yeah. And to get a decent margin, we had to have higher prices.
I think Chester talks about at one point where you needed some capital, and he started knocking on banks' doors, and they said, no, 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 no. And either you were with him or knew what he was doing,
No,
correct?
I knew what he was doing, yeah. We finally ended up, the banking deal, that was a ways down the line, and he ended up at a bank in Dallas, the Republic National Bank. Did he mention Terry Carter to you?
No.
Well, Terry Carter was the chief financial officer at QuikTrip for many years. He worked for the bank at that time, and it was our banking officer down there. We got set up. After we got set up, we were doing business BOK at that time, and they said no. Chester called him and just told him we're moving the business tomorrow. The president of the bank called Chester and said, what are you doing? He said, well, we came to you and told you what we needed, and you said you wouldn't do it. So we found someone who said they would do it. He said, well, you should come back to me. Chester said, look, you told me no. However, what we'll do, they're going to parcel this out to some other banks, not just theirs, and we'll ask them to give you part of the loan that way, and we did do that. And then ultimately we did get back to be okay because the bank down there changed hands to them many times, and they got where they wouldn't answer the phone as readily as Chester thought they should. So we changed back to be okay and have been there since.
You said you never worry, so you went on to stores 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then there were ups and downs, but you figured that this idea is going to work, basically because you knew it was working in Dallas.
I never had any problems with it, yeah.
Are you still connected to QuikTrip today?
I only own a small amount. My family only owns a small amount of stock. I am emeritus on the board out there, which isn't much fun because if you're not truly involved in the deal, it's not fun just to watch them read reports, but I do go to the meetings. We'll go to one this week.
That'll give you a sense of pride as you go about your business and then you see the QuikTrip signs and so forth, what you had to do with that.
I like that.
Must be a good, nice feeling.
I like that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Chester turned out, as you just said, a world-class businessman. What a nice surprise.
Yeah.
You guys were obviously good friends.
That company, we started 54 years ago this fall. That thing has got 15,000 employees now. I mean, that's crazy. I don't think any other Oklahoma-owned company has 15,000 employees in it. And they don't all have to be in Oklahoma, but I mean just employ that many.
Hundreds of stores.
We have about 670 or 80 stores now.
I suppose several billion in sales.
Over 12 billion in sales.
And Fortune magazine consistently names QuikTrip to the list of best companies to work for in America.
Right. We're really proud of that.
Chester talks about how important it was that the employees know how important they are to the business.
That was a philosophy that evolved during the first probably 10 years of our life.
Okay.
I don't think Chester knew or thought about that in the first 2 or 3 years that we were in business. One of the things that he did always say, we always have to keep expanding so employers will know they have a chance to progress. That's what a lot of people lose sight of. They have evolved this employee deal really well and gone very far with it, and the rest is history. I mean, it's the best known convenience store in the country now.
Yeah. Meanwhile, you're off starting other businesses, aren't you?
Yeah, from time to time, and not for my benefit either. I've lost a lot of money, and I should have just paid attention to QuikTrip.
Were you in the oil and gas business?
Yes. I started a company called Hurricane Trading Company. We were in that about 5 years, bought and sold crude oil, did very well in it, and then got out of it, closed it down when the market changed. Started another company called Gas Energy Development Company, which was buying and selling natural gas. We did not do as well in that one as we did in the first one, but we didn't lose anything. I'd take interest in wells from time to time, but nothing big. I do not consider myself an oilie, okay?
Right. Another business was a Day School Incorporated?
My second wife was in the daycare center business, and the first one, she bought that business with me as a partner from her brother. I was in it with her for 12 years.
Here we're sitting on the floor of Leaders Life Insurance Company, which is your very viable business right now.
Yeah, it's an interesting deal. I started that when I was 56 years old. And I read the biography of Ray Kroc, the guy that started McDonald's. He was 56 years old when he started McDonald's. I was 56, had gotten a divorce, just sitting around, and I thought, I've always wanted to try to have an insurance company instead of an agency. This is an agency here, the Holmes organization is. So I went out and I raised $1 million from friends of mine. The first guy was Fulton Collins. He listened to me for 20 minutes and wrote me a check for $100,000. I raised $1 million, and then ultimately, the next year or two, I had to raise another $1 million. But started that thing, didn't have enough money, didn't know anything about the business.
The business of life insurance?
Yeah, it's a particular kind of life insurance. Oh. And it was a specialty product. We made it. It's grown too slowly, as far as I'm concerned. But for many years, it made some money. It did not make any money last year for the first time in maybe 10 or 12 years. But it's still viable and has value.
There's another company, American Institute of Medical Technology.
Yeah, a friend of mine called me one day and said, hey, I've got a guy in town I want you to meet. So this guy comes in, they're from India. He came in with this idea of starting a school to train medical technologists, specifically ultrasound technologists originally. I didn't really want to do it very bad, but I'm pretty entrepreneurial, and it looked like an opportunity. It's the right business. When you talk about getting in the medical business, as much as it's expanding, taking more and more of our money every year, it offered me a way into that business. So we've done that. We've been around about 7 or 8 years. It's been very difficult. I don't know whether ultimately it's going to make it or not, but it's still alive.
And then National Occupational Health Services.
Yeah. A friend of mine sold his wholesale grocery business and was talking to me, looking for something. Another friend of mine owned a piece of a drug testing company owned by a doctor who died, and they wanted to sell that thing. I said, well, let's go see these guys and see if we can make a deal, which we did do, and we took over their existing business. We were completely ignorant, didn't know anything about it, but my partner is Brad Petty, part of the Petty family that has a store in Utica Square. He is a super businessman. He learned that business. We've now morphed it into an industrial medicine clinic to handle workman's comp claims, industrial claims, in addition to the testing that we do. And it's doing very well now.
You were just a born businessman, weren't you? I mean, you say you didn't take any knowledge from TU, but there's an instinct that some people are born with. Would you
There's
agree?
no doubt that I have instincts of a small businessman. I never think of building a business as big as QuikTrip. That evolved over 50 some odd years,
Right.
Started out very small, one store. I call myself a small businessman. I have good instincts for doing those kinds of things. Now, having said that, doesn't mean I haven't lost.
Have you ever gone broke, as we say?
Yeah, sort of.
Have you had to sell everything off, homes and cars?
No, I've never had to do that. I had to sell a house in Aspen, and I had to sell my best painting that I ever owned, both for a lot of money. But I told the bankers, the people involved, where I had debt, I said, look, if you'll leave me alone in the Holmes organization, I can pay all the interest that I need to and eventually be able to pay off the principal. They always left me alone, and I did what I said I would do over a protracted period of time. But it didn't go quick. When all the banks went broke because of Penn Square.
Penn Square Bank in Oklahoma City.
The insurance agency lost a lot of money. We wrote off $400,000 in 1 year for drilling contractors who could not pay their insurance bill. But we stayed in business. But the next year I got a divorce. So I had a lot of debt. I was a land speculator. I couldn't sell the land I owned for any price. I was caught. But I went to see the banks and told them what I was doing, and I would work my way through them. It took me to pay off my first wife and the banks 14 years. Just pecking away at it, and finally got that done.
But you had this Holmes organization, and so the bank said, as long as you have that business.
And it was growing.
Right.
That and some other deals that were good deals allowed me to pay them all.
Are you able to point out one or two of your best business decisions?
Yeah, probably. This is probably number one. The QuikTrip meeting with Chester, following up on an idea that I had, was probably one of the best things I've ever done, period. Another thing that I should have done, and I did do, was that I resigned from my dad's business at about age 32 because I needed to be in business for myself. That was a biggie for me also.
But that was a contentious relationship between you and your dad for a
Yes,
long
it
time.
was. Yes, it was.
Was it just a personality?
Yeah, I think it was. He grew up in a different generation than I grew up in, and I was interested in things that he wasn't prepared to talk to me about, and one of them was ownership in the business at my young age of 32. So, yeah, it caused stress, and I did the right thing by deciding to leave, yes.
Students who are interested in business and they're listening to you, what kind of advice do you give to these young people or young adults that want to start a business?
I don't give advice, but I do believe this, that everything starts with a dream or an idea. An idea is a dream, in my opinion. If the dream has substance to it, it needs to be followed until a logical conclusion. But most people cannot do that because people cannot make decisions in the same way that I make decisions. I can, what I call, pull the trigger. I can think about something and then decide, instead of, oh, I'd like to do that, I do it. And I pull the trigger. Well, every once in a while I pull it on bad deals. And good deals are better than bad deals. I'll just flat tell you that. Yeah.
So that's an instinct that we've talked about earlier.
Most people cannot pull the trigger. Most people sit around and talk about, I'd like to do this, I'd like to do that, I'd like to do something else. But they cannot pull the trigger to leave the comfort of their employment or whatever arrangements they are in to go out and do something that has risk involved in it. I am not risk averse.
then how would you like to be remembered?
Oh, I think that I would like to be remembered as somebody who was honest and honorable and worked hard. Those things are enough for me.
Well, I want to thank you for this time we've spent with you, giving your time. I know you're a busy guy. I don't know how many businesses you're balancing right now.
I'm getting ready to go to a bank director's meeting.
Yeah,
so I'm
right.
involved in that, and a lot fewer things than I used to be, because the older you get, your energy level decreases. And most people who are not old do not understand that. And I used to be able to multitask a whole bunch of things at one time. I cannot anymore because I just don't have the energy.
Yeah.
So I'm in a few things, and I try to do them as well as I can.
Well, thank you, Burt, for this time. I appreciate you doing it very much. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. I'm happy to be involved with this thing. Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.
You have been listening to the Voices of Oklahoma podcast, stories taken from the oral history website, voicesofoklahoma.com. At the website, you will discover an array of storytellers. Many you will know. Some will be new to you, but all will be worth your time. This work depends on listeners like you, who are interested in learning about the great people of Oklahoma. Our website provides an opportunity to donate to this 501c3 project, which preserves Oklahoma history, one voice at a time. voicesofoklahoma.com.